Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this Wednesday study in the book of Judges. I know it's a snowy one out there. Hope and pray that you all have a safe journey home if you're out and about, and drive careful. And as you see on our screen today, we're picking up in Judges chapter 9, and we're going forward with the 30th verse. And I thought before we get into the text, I wanted to take a look at the map and look at the city that today's text will be focusing around, and that is the city of Shechem. Circling it here with the cursor, and you'll see its proximity to the Dead Sea, which is to the south, and that this is about, they say it's 45 miles to the center of the Dead Sea, and so I'm estimating it's about 30 miles from the edge of the Dead Sea to Shechem. And I wanted you to just be aware of that distance because it will play into the narrative of the story. So we're picking up on verse 30. And again, we are kind of caught in between two judges, if you will. We finished the story of Gideon, and now we're in a chapter that does not technically have a judged name to it, although we see um, Jotham, which is a relative of Gideon, one of his sons by one of the many wives of his father. Again, strange family dynamics there, but he's a relative of Gideon, and he plays a role in here. And but yet there's typically no judge, but yet we're going to see at the end that God is still working through people who aren't even aligned with him, but his will is being accomplished. And so I find that to be kind of the moral uh, basis of this chapter as to how God works through people who don't even realize it, who aren't aligned with Him, but yet God's will is being done nonetheless. Kind of an eye-opening thing in my estimation here. So we get to verse 30, that Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Eved, and his anger was kindled. Um, I want to just jump into the Hebrew here a little bit because there's a richness of verbiage here that we just lose in English. As we have mentioned numerous times before, the words of the people, the names of the people here do not necessarily reflect the names that they were born with, that the names have more to do with the role that they're playing and the importance of what the story is and contributing to a greater understanding of the factors and the players in this story. So obviously to us, Zebul and Gaal and Eved um, sound like words and names that have no meaning to us. But the beauty of what we have with our modern technology here is to go to Bible software. This can also be done manually in books. If you learn the Hebrew, you can research these words, but it has made it so easy for us if we don't need to put all that time in of years of study. We can still glean a lot of learning just from using the software that's there, and that's kind of my purpose in showing this to you. So we clicked on the hyperlink of the number 2083. Every Hebrew word in the Bible has a number assigned to it that allows you to look it up and study. And so it just basically tells us what we've learned in English. Again, sometimes a little bit of digging is needed. That's Zebul is just the officer of Abimelech. Well, the beauty of this is it tells you where the origin of the word is from, and it's from the word of Zaval. And of course, when you hover over it, it turns into a hyperlink. You can open that Zaval, and it again, they're not quite sure either. This word has only been used once prior to this, and so it's kind of an obscure word, and Bible translators struggle with how to translate some of these words from antiquity where the meaning is lost to us today. So Zaval, they're saying, means to dwell. So with that thought in mind, think of where this guy is. He's dwelling in as the ruler of this city. And so he's higher up there, he's dwelling there, he's embedded in this, and it comes to the name of Gaal. you may notice that there's a Hebrew word in the New Testament called Galilee. That also has a very strong significance. Galilee means to be revealed. So when Jesus is from Galilee, it gives inference to his revealing of who he was and what his mission was to the world. Again, just adds another level of understanding and depth of knowledge to this. But here, Gaal, while it may be somewhat referenced, we're going to take a look at that and click on that word. And again, it will just give you, first of all, what the translators called it, just the name of a Canaanite, not really sure. But then you can dig a little bit deeper by going into the word origin. And we see that in this case, this does not reference a revealing, but it is something that is a loathing and abhorring to it. It's something that is brought forth that's disgusting and that causes a um, kind of a feeling of I don't want this to be there. It's stirring things up, stirring things up. Now, that can also have somewhat of a reference to a revealing. Obviously, when Jesus came and was revealed, it stirred things up. It caused those to align with him, and those that didn't align with him were very stirred up in a very negative way against him. So you can see how some of these words play together. So here was this guy named Gaal, but in reality, it probably wasn't his real name, but we're going to see that he did stir things up. He caused dissension as he revealed things that he felt were true, but it caused a dissension. So it talks about him being the son of Eved. Now, Eved to us in English doesn't mean much, but Eved in Hebrew is a servant. So here was this guy who they were telling us that his mother was a concubine, was a servant, and she wasn't of noble lineage, wasn't of high status. She was kind of an outcast. He was probably illegitimate that way. Um, just gives you what they're trying to do is play in here and tell you that this was a pretty base and not a very good guy. Comes from a bad background. His dad impregnated a servant woman, and here he is, and he's stirring up a lot of trouble. So that's the basis of it. But then we get to two really, really fun words here. It says that Zevul was angered, and his anger was aroused. And in order to really see the beauty of the Hebrew, we need to just take a look at these two words, vayichar, which means to be aroused. And we'll see that this word comes from a Hebrew word of chara, which means to burn or be kindled with anger. And of course, in our current life that we live in, we think of anger in one way, and that is, being mad, throwing pots and pans around, saying things that are irrational, and just having a anger fit and seeing that display of anger. That's what goes through our mind. And this is where having an understanding from the Hebrew that anger back then, as it's translated, doesn't always mean the same thing as we understand it today, especially when we start talking about the anger of the Lord. And, many people have a very negative understanding of the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, thinking that God is angry all the time. In fact, there's even a verse you can find that says that he's angry all the time, every day, with everything that's happening. And we get I believe, a different understanding today than what they would have understood back when this was written. And while we can't have a total 100% understanding of what they thought when it was written, we can get a little closer and realize that our understanding today is most likely not the way they understood it back then. And so this word of vayachar, of being kindled, again, the kindling is something that begins to start churning over within you, and think of it as a passion, that you're beginning, something has irritated you, and you are beginning to feel this feeling inside of you that wants to rise up and act in a way because either something is being done inappropriate or someone is being harmed or something is done against your moral code inside and your moral ideals. And so you just start to feel this arousing, and the vayachar is this warming, if you will, of the inside. And then this next word is apo, is translated as anger all the time, but when you open it up, what do you see? It is the word af, which is the word for nostril or nose or face or anger. And here is where the study of the language and the gaining a better understanding really takes a new turn. And you'll see that you wonder, what is the relationship here? Well, remember that these were Middle Eastern people who were nomadic, who had um, animals that they raised, that they traveled on. It was very much that you were involved with um, camels and donkeys and things like that. And so a camel, when it is frustrated, will flare its nose. And we sometimes do the same thing. You know, you see pictures of, we'll say, people who are getting angry, that their face will turn red and their nostrils will flare. And so when the Bible talks about anger, especially even with God being angry, it is the imagery of frustration that sets in. It's the imagery of a passion on the inside that is being reflected by facial expressions. Also remembering that God is spirit and does not have a face, does not have a nose. So when it talks about God's nose flaring, we need to just step back and take a look and try to gain a context of what kind of emotion is being displayed here, emotion that God has that is somewhat being interpreted by what we feel and that what we see and what our imagery is on when we get angry. And it may not necessarily align completely with how God is feeling. It's just the way it was interpreted by the writers at that time and the way we interpret it. So a nostrils flaring, um, of course, can relay many different things. It can be just being put in a place to where you are frustrated and you're going, who has not been frustrated and you let out or you kind of snort with your nostrils a little bit. You just exhale in a strong way. Your nostrils are flaring. That is one range of emotion that could be ascribed to this aroused with anger. And just something to think about as you study and read in the Bible when you come across God being angry. It's nice to have a little bit of understanding here of what could be taking place. So obviously this guy, Zebul, is anger. He's full of angriness, and some things are taking place here. So now as we go through the verses, there are many different things that come to play, and it's setting up the stage here that Abimelech arose, laid wait against Shechem, had 4 companies of soldiers. Gaal, son of Ebed, again trying to make him look bad, son of this servant girl, went out, entered the city. Abimelech rose up. They were lying in wait. Gaal saw the people. He said to Zebul, "Wow, where's everybody coming from? You see all these people. I thought it was the shadow from the mountain, but it's not. It's people all over. I'm way outnumbered," Gaal says in verse 37. And in verse 38 is really kind of humorous. Um, Zebul says to him, "Where is now thy mouth, where you had said, Who is Abimelech that we should serve him?" And he says, "I pray, go out and fight with them." Basically, he's saying, put your money where your mouth is. Again, we will use certain euphemisms saying he's shooting off his big mouth and, he's all talk but no action. It's just interesting to see where this came from in a biblical sense, relating to the very same thing that we use as metaphors today. And so Zebul is saying to him, you and your big mouth got you into this. Now stand by your words and go and fight with him. And verse 39 says, okay, Gaal went out and before the men of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. Now, what I saw when I was going through the Hebrew is something very interesting, that in Hebrew you can get a sense for the emotion that is going on there. Um, English, we need to show words like he was motivated or he was not motivated or he was excited or not excited. In Hebrew, it normally doesn't do that in with a separate word. It will do that by creating a verb that has intensity to it or emotion to it. There are actually 7 verb stems in Hebrew that give you things of whether it's a textbook um, type of or a dictionary type of explanation or meaning, or whether it's intensive or whether it's passive. Is it reflexive? Is it happening to him? Is it active or is it not active? And so all those verb endings really help enhance the information that we understand. So you would think that when Gaal is going out to Shechem, this would be filled with intensity. They're going out to battle, they're all whipped up in a frenzy and all, as gung-ho as they could be. But yet, when we read the Hebrew, we see that there is no intensity to it whatsoever. It uses here that they went out, and it is in the cal form, which means it has no emotion to it whatsoever. It just says they went out. It doesn't say they went strongly, intensely. So obviously, Gaal is not in a good mood here. He's not feeling led for victory. And we see that the other verb here of translated as being fought, vahilachem, it is in what's called a nifal form, which is a passive, somewhat of a reflexive, which means he fought because he was compelled to fight. He is going because he had to eat his words, and these emotions inside of him were not one of positivity, not one that he felt he was going to come away victorious, but it was like, okay, I'm doomed. I'm going to my death. We're all going to die. Um, and I'm being driven to do this. And I wish I would have never opened my big mouth because this is really going to end bad. And so that's what we gain from the Hebrew. And we say, okay, of course, in verse 40, this is what happens. Abimelech chases him, kills them, fell down wounded. Um, all is going in a really, really bad way in this battle, and Abimelech is having the upper hand, and just gives a little bit of the indication of the battle that's going on. And then when we get to verse 45, it's kind of interesting that he demolishes the city of Shechem, but he doesn't just stop there. It says that he sowed it with salt. And that's an interesting topic, that they were so determined to make this city a city of desolation, to make sure that nothing would ever grow there again, that they covered it with salt. Well, where are you going to get salt from out in the desert? You have to go to the Dead Sea. How far away is the Dead Sea? It's 30 miles away. How determined Abimelech must have been to set up a transport system of camels or caravan and men carrying these, that they carried salt for 30 some miles just to throw it on the ground of a decimated city, just to make sure that nothing would ever grow there again. Now, looking ahead, we do see that the city of Shechem does get rebuilt, but it must have taken a long time for the elements to wash away the salt and for that salt to dissipate into something that wasn't going to just poison the ground. 30 miles away. That's pretty incredible. So as this chapter ends, we see that the battle continues. There was a tower in Shechem. This Abimelech guy was not a nice guy. He sees the people in the tower and says, okay, well, we're not going to get them out. Let's start a fire at the bottom and let's cook them out and create a big chimney and toast them all. So he starts cutting down trees. Obviously, the topography of the land was much more um, of a better climate than what we see now, had more trees, more grassland, and so forth than what we typically picture it looks like today. So they were able to cut trees down, bring them up. He gets everybody involved, and then verse 49, they set it on fire and cook these people out from the inside. And there was about 1,000 people in this tower that became toasted. And now in this tower, again, what was so interesting is God is still at work here in some way, and we're going to see this when it comes to um, the next chapter, or excuse me, the next verse here, where they were in the tower. The people were getting toasted, and verse 53 says that a certain woman cast a piece of millstone out the window. Obviously, they were throwing things out the windows just to try to you know, defend themselves in any way. And she throws out a piece of millstone. It's actually the upper millstone of a grinding system, estimated to be 12 inches in diameter and about 27 pounds. And she throws it out the window, and it falls on Abimelech's head, and goes to crush his skull. And he obviously doesn't die immediately. In verse 54 says, "Hey, wait a minute! I don't want anybody to remember that I was killed by a woman," says to his armor bearer, "Come and pierce me with the sword so that my legacy can say that I didn't die at the hand of a woman." I really, really struggle to understand the mindset from this time period and the mindset of what a warrior must have been, and how he's not thinking of, like he's afraid to die. He seems to be accepting that he's going to die, but the worst thing to him at this moment where he's about to die is that, oh, don't let it be said that a woman killed me. I just, it shows the mindset, the prejudice, the stereotype that they had back then of between men and women, of what this culture was like. And I think it shows also the hand of God in here, because we see in verse 56 that God's was in this. So here God is instructing this woman, guiding her. We don't know who she was. It was a certain woman, not even giving any name for her, but we know that God is in this, working through this woman to just throw a millstone out the window, lands on Abimelech's head, guided by God's presence so that it hits him right where it's supposed to, not on the shoulder, not in the foot, but hits him in the head, and does the damage here. And verse 57 tells us that God was in charge of this. He was working through this woman. And again, it builds up that even though they were very anti woman back then and very male chauvinist, God is not. And God uses these things that society says are positive or negative. He will use the marginalized. If we can use that word today, because it's very common for us to think of that way, those that are least thought of, those that are marginalized in society, God's favor is upon them, and God uses them in ways that give Him glory and honor. And just incredible story here. If you want to go back to verse 20, which is this curse of Jotham, is what he was coming and supporting. Uh, and the fulfillment of it takes place here in verse 57. So I hope you enjoyed that. Again, just shows the mercies of our God and how He is always in control and working in ways that pretty much amaze us and astound us at all times. And if He can do it back then for people in those circumstances, just think how much more He works in our behalf today, and working in ways that we don't understand, ways that maybe we wouldn't ever think could be possible, but God does that for His glory to be revealed. So God bless you. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy this study, and look forward to seeing you next week. Bye bye.